Well, thank you, Paolo, for the nice introduction. And first of all, I'd like to thank the local organizing committee, Chantal, and all her team for organizing this great Congress. It has been 3 years that I have been your president of the association, and it feels great now to finally meet you all in person because we have been very distant for a long time. We already heard in this opening ceremony the topic of involving consumers in a transition towards sustainable and healthy food systems. And this is actually also the talk of my presidential address, to make a plea for more attention to what is happening with the consumer. If we want to think about how we can make changes in the food system to make nutrition finally more sustainable and also more healthy. I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, Matthias Staudigl, Christina Neubig, no, they're all gone here, Christina Neubig, Matthias Staudigl, and Herdis Argovi, who have worked with me for many years in a big research project where we have been thinking about healthy nutrition and market regulation, and this is one of the outcomes of this project. Addressing the grand societal challenges related to climate change, biodiversity loss, but also poverty and health, requires a deep understanding of the agri-food system and their dynamic nature. Consumers in these agri-food systems navigate many consumption opportunities each and every day, and changes to the food environment will finally influence choice. So if we want to understand what is happening in these dynamic food systems, we also need to understand how the consumer is reacting to changes in the food environment. Various instruments are at the hands of policymakers and private sector actors. These involve information and education policies, including labeling, and there's always big hope into good labeling systems, but maybe also these big hopes are sometimes overstated, as we also heard in the discussion already now. We also have fiscal and price policies to which consumers react, but in the times of high inflation in Europe, we see how difficult it is to talk about increasing prices, even if you have true cost pricing strategies that have experimentally been implemented by retailers in different European countries nowadays. We also have command and control type policies affecting market entry and food product composition. All of these different policies will have an impact on consumer choices, but it is a challenge to kind of understand what kind of impact will be resulting from these policies. And this is because we are dealing with a market with very strong product differentiation. Here we don't only have competition among manufacturer brands, but also with retail brands. And here these different type of brands often try to occupy similar areas in the attribute space formed by certifications, by labels, and different nutrition and health claims. However, habit-driven food choice processes by consumers are guided by experience of sensory and overall product quality. So it is my objective in this presentation today to bring to you some ideas that are not completely new, of course, on trying to understand what role do actually have these product labels on the one hand, but sensory expectations and sensory experiences on the other hand for food product choice, so that we can better predict and understand the heterogeneous responses of consumers in a highly differentiated market. And to involve this kind of understanding, we think that it is important to use sensory science methods not only in a small case study world, how we often do it in sensory sciences, but also to extend it to a large set of products and to better understand how we can study this differentiated market. So nevertheless, I will be actually presenting results from still a case study on consumer choices, and we focus in this case study on breakfast cereals in Germany, We did an online experiment. Due to the pandemic, I couldn't see you, but I also had to do online experiments with 4 choices among breakfast cereals. And in this case, we focus on muesli, so the granola type cereals. We also have another paper that deals more with children's cereals or breakfast cereals for children. And I have also some data of that here. But most I will be talking about muesli, and I will talk about how the labels and claims influence choice, and on the contrary, how do sensory expectations influence choice. So this is what we have about the children's cereals. This is actually data from 60 different brands and sub-brands of children's cereals. And so as children's cereals, we describe cereals that have some cartoon figures or clearly marketed to children, like Choco Pops and Nougat Pillows and Frosted Flakes and what you all have. And you see here the variation in sugar content per 100 gram in these cereals. And I think what is most remarkable is that this actually goes up to 40 grams per 100 gram of cereal. And then you can say, okay, well, these are different brands. On the x-axis, we have different brands. And this may be that maybe brands specialize on different types of cereals, but that is not the problem. We do actually have different types of cereals, but we still have a lot of variation. So now on the right-hand side, you see the different types of cereals. We still have a lot of variation in the sugar content here. So this is why we argue there is actually room to make sensory appealing products also by variation of nutrient content. And we did this here more in the study with a health focus, but I think we can similarly do that in a focus on sustainability, for instance, protein content. So when we think about what can we do in terms of making products more sustainable or more healthy, then a lot of approaches are going along by either looking at nutrient elasticity. So for instance, Staudigl and Anders did exactly that. They looked at the elasticity for sodium content in chips products, estimated elasticities, and then simulated different types of reformulation policies. Other papers rather think about understanding product appeal and consumer perception, and these are usually these kind of experimental papers. And what we are trying to do is to come to a way to bring these both sides together. Probably many of you will know that when we think about food product, then we see the entire food product presentation being consistent of intrinsic attributes and extrinsic attributes. And intrinsic attributes include sensory properties such as appearance, taste, texture, and flavor, and are then perceived by the consumer through intrinsic cues. Extrinsic attributes, including also importantly the price, but also brand and product type or label information, are perceived through extrinsic cues, so for instance the labels, and then influence consumer perception, and then finally influence consumer choice. So it is this pathway that we want to look at, is how do these intrinsic attributes, also nutrient content, and also extrinsic attributes like product appeal, influence consumer perception of what they like in the product or not. As agricultural economists, when doing consumer research, what we often do is that we look, for instance, in choice experiments on how labels influence consumer choices. And I think this is a very valid approach, but we must also see that when consumers look at supermarket shelves, they see different things. So they see entire packages, and the entire packages communicates not only through labels, but also through a lot of marketing information. So for the cereals that we have in our study, we try to measure roughly the percentage area on the package that is actually devoted to claims and hard fact information. And that's maybe 5 to 10%, and most of the package is a nice picture, the brand name, as you see it just here. and this obviously guides also consumer perception. And what we do usually in sensory studies is that we say, okay, we have different labels and we have different products, and we see how information about these labels influences taste experiences. So we did this, for instance, a few years ago with Megan Waldrop and Sabine Groß with ham, and we had different types of ham without labels, with an organic labels, but also with animal welfare labels, and I just abbreviated here as InnoPig and ITV, nothing to remember, but different kind of animal welfare labels. So what we realize here is that when the different types of ham, the 4 different types of ham listed here in the blind condition, there's basically no difference in hedonic appreciation of the taste and the tasting experience of these hams. But as people see their hams with different labels, they have very different taste expectations. And what is interesting is that these taste expectations also carry over to the full information tasting. So then when you see the label, then the organic ham suddenly tastes better than the other ham. If you don't know that it's organic ham, you don't taste the difference. And therefore, it's important to consider that when we see how packages, for instance, are designed, is that we raise consumers' expectation and also responses in their actual taste experience. Yes, so a challenge for applying this kind of hedonic and sensory methods to our question on how to regulate food market is this high degree of horizontal product differentiation, and that we often are unclear about which attributes to take into account. There's some talk about so-called Q attributes that stand for many things other than the attribute itself. So for instance, a local label stands to short distances, but also maybe better flavors, nicer farmers, or whatever you have in your home region. So with this case study, we try to address the question of how we can move with the sensory studies into this differentiated market to measure product perception and taste expectations by consumers to better describe food choice options and to understand the role of heterogeneity in perceptions and preferences. In our methodological approach, we go forward with a multi-task study design, and we first look at the extrinsic attributes and the intrinsic attributes of our product category. We measure taste expectations, and we look at product choice. So we decided from the beginning to focus on muesli because we have in Germany a large share of various muesli types in the market for the different breakfast cereals. We look at extrinsic attributes and intrinsic attribute, and we did some market research based on GfK household scanner data to identify relevant products. So we identified 24 products of 3 types: fruit, chocolate, and crunchy, and 6 brands with variant nutrient claims such as no added sugar and so on. We measured taste expectations, and to do so, we developed a repertoire in focus groups to describe the sensory characteristics of the products, like sour and sweet and so on. So we have basically 12 different descriptors, and we measure them then finally in the online study with a kata measure. That means check all that applies. So either yes, no, I expect this to be sweet, or not so in the questionnaire. And then we finally measure product choice, and we do this in a choice experiment with 24 mueslis and 72 choice sets of binary forced choice. And one can discuss a lot about the benefit of binary of forced choices, but we thought the survey was already very complicated, so that made it a little bit easier. And we have data of about 350 consumers. So here you see some data from the muesli market in Germany. So horizontal differentiation, so that's not all horizontal, but it's 565 unique product identifiers in the German market according to the GfK data. So You would say, who cares about muesli? But it's already quite complex. Huh? So 66 brands and sub-brands, and we selected 2 main manufacturer brands and 4 main retail brands, and we excluded all the specialty muesli like cranberry muesli or organic muesli because there are different distribution channels and or very small market shares. So we took one of the major manufacturer brands, the typical type, and we shipped them during the corona pandemic to people's homes and asked them to participate in focus group studies and describe what they tasted. And out of that, we got different adjectives, and we kind of reduced this repertoire of adjectives to make 12 out of them to make the whole thing feasible and to make it descriptive. So in the correspondence analysis, we can see how the different muesli types position themselves in the attribute space or in the sensory space, so to say. And you see in the top left panel the fruit mueslis, and you see as you move to the center, the chocolate mueslis are perceived a lot sweeter. And then you go to the crunchy muesli, and you see then, of course, also the change in texture that you have there. And it's also interesting, if you look at the lower right part of the panel, you see the bitter flavors, and these are basically occupied by the bittersweet chocolate types in the chocolate and the crunchy type mueslis. So we did then this choice experiment with 24 mueslis, and I mentioned already a lot of these different parts in our experiment. So because we were dealing with real products, we weren't able to do a perfect experimental design, but we still had some very experimental variation in price, and we tried to combine different types so that we have brands and flavors kind of occupying the same space. And I must say, we have a very specific sample, and that's because of another part of the study. So we have young people, and we have dominantly male people, which is rather rare in consumer research, actually. Maybe because we were looking for people being quick on computers, and then the gamers came into the story. We estimated different models, and first of all, we did a simple multinomial logit model, and we had 2 types of model specification. Once we had the label, where we included brand, muesli type, and pack size, but then also the labels in our estimation, and then we had the kata measures of the sensory profile that went into the estimation of the multinomial logit model. We are interested, of course, in consumer heterogeneity, so we also estimated a mixed logit model for the kata type only. This is what I'm going to present. So here we have individual specific parameter estimates using a standard normal distribution with a mean shift in these parameter estimates. And then we also looked into a latent class model to better describe market segments, and this is what I'm going to present here in the end. Yeah, so what do our results look like? So in these tables, it's a little bit complicated. So on the left side with the blue, you see the model with the labels. And in the green to the right, you see then the variable names where we include the katas. So bitter, sour, sweet, and so on. So one interesting result, for instance, is that we often talk about this untasty or healthy equal untasty intuition, and I think maybe consumers are sometimes further than we think, because when you see here, for instance, the part of the less sweet, we see actually a consumer preference by consumers for these less sweet types of muesli. On the other hand, the added sugar, let's just say here, the added sugar just below is not significant, so a claim no added sugar does not seem to be the right communication to consumers. On the other hand, when we look at the kata measures, we also see that the perception or an expectation of sweetness actually reduces the utility of this muesli brand. And this in the multinomial logit and in the mixed logit model. We also have different estimators for brand values, as shown in the lower part here of the table, where we have the different brands. And what comes out is that the brands seem to position quite different sensory spaces, because as soon as we include the kata measures, the brand parameter estimates become often non-significant. So there seems to be something happening in consumer perception. I want to move to the latent class model. So here we took a 3-class specification, and you see here a lot of different parameters. On the left in the blue, you always have the variable names with the parameters, and in the gray and to the right, you have the other parameters with the corresponding parameter names. But just to draw the conclusion, what kind of classes do we have? We have class 1 with a medium price sensitivity, a preference for fruit muesli for the brands, the retail brands, Edeka and Aldi, and with different sensory preferences in terms of bitterness, this preference or non-preference for bitter and sweet, but a preference for soft, crispy, and cereal types muesli. The second class shows a strong price sensitivity, a preference for the crunchy and chocolate muesli, a preference for the brands, Köln, one of the, I would say, higher priced manufacturer brands, and Rewe, which is very well doing in imitating the packages actually of Köln and the main brand Vitalis. And we have also a non-preference, so they prefer less bitterness and softness and more sourness, and this is actually the only class that doesn't have a preference for sweetness. And then we have the class 3, which is not price sensitive at all. It doesn't like the Lidl brand and the large packages as typical for discounter brands, and we also see a different sensory profile. So with this, I think we can already describe very well the different segments in the muesli market. For Germany, the interpretation of the classes makes a lot of sense. And here we can better understand how to tailor reformulation and changes in product offers to consumers to adapt their dietary choices. So coming to a conclusion, we see a large variety of highly differentiated food products in modern consumer markets, and that makes it necessary to understand the heterogeneous consumer response to marketing strategies and public food policies. And maybe it's also important to stress that both public policies and private marketing policies are kind of competing with each other and sometimes also frustrating each other in their effectiveness. Public interventions to address public health or sustainability goals have limited impact often because of the heterogeneous consumer response. And in this competitive market environment, consumers are not only influenced by specific nutrition information via nutrient content and front of pack claims, but more likely they are influenced by overall product appeal. As you can see from the packages, our packages are not white or gray, they are colorful and give us a lot of information that we don't cover in our choice experiments when we talk about labels and claims. And this is because they form product perception, taste expectation, and then finally also taste experiences. Our results show that muesli brands and types capture part of this heterogeneity in the brand preference space, and addressing consumers based on their sensory preference profiles may help to improve the effectiveness of policy. For instance, our results seem to point to the fact that this unhealthy equal tasty intuition, which is very popular sometimes in the discussions, because it's also such a nice wording, I think, is maybe less prominent than we sometimes think it is. Of course, my presentation with this little case study involved already many steps, but still it has certainly many limitations. And the most important one is obviously that in the corona pandemic, we had to move to an online experiment. We actually wanted to do a sensory experiment in person, but we had to spend the money before the lockdown was ended. So it is, of course, important in the situation of repeat purchases to really have a sensory experience and to maybe even have repeated sensory experience if we actually want to predict about market outcomes. We have to acknowledge the heterogeneity in perception and preferences. So people may differ in their preference for sweetness in muesli, for instance. But people may also differ in how they interpret a specific color in symbolizing sweetness or predicting sweetness in their expectation from the package. So given that sensory experience are driven by sensory expectations, it may also be that we can think about more on how to change the entire product environment, for instance, also with package appeals, to make also healthy and sustainable choices more attractive to consumers, and then not to disappoint them with the actual experience, but also follow up on that in delivering what has been promised in the package. With that, I'm already at the end, and I thank you for your attention.